encouraged to see so many participants logging in on time, and that's always very helpful. Um, so today we want to speak about a topic that was given to me by the Bhakti Yoga Club, which I thought was very wonderful. It marries two very important concepts in this world currently. The first concept, of course, is the concept of what's happening around us. Uh, and with COVID-19 and the variants that are moving around, everyone's looking for a cure. And if they can't find a cure, at least a vaccine. The other thing that is an interesting concept that we should always keep in mind is the concept of happiness. And that is something that goes on. The quest for happiness continues, whether there is COVID, there is no COVID. And sometimes we feel that life has become very difficult. Sometimes we feel we have to adjust. Things have become topsy-turvy. All the more reason for this time, troubled times, difficult and challenging times, for us to perhaps ask a relevant question. And that relevant question is the question of, what is the secret of happiness? Is there a way to be happy? And if it is, then how do we do it? More important than that is the question of, if happiness comes, how do we sustain it? So today's topic then is aptly titled as the happiness vaccine, because without happiness in our lives, it can be a very difficult thing to continue. What does happiness mean, generally speaking, to all of us? Well, generally, whenever you ask anyone or you go by a dictionary term, then happiness is a sense of well-being. It's also a sense of joy. And very often, if you look deeper, you'll find that happiness almost always touches on the concept of contentment. So these are all very important ideas that relate to happiness. The other thing that's very important is happiness has two other cousins. And the cousins of happiness that you cannot divorce from happiness are actually satisfaction and peace. These are two very important ends, if I may use the word, end goals of happiness, actually, which we will explore later. The good news about happiness is when you have, enough or abundance of happiness, no one actually complains, right? I was just thinking that in this world, everybody, is always, we're all running after something and we feel we can get something more. And sometimes it's never enough. Living in an age where we are constantly bombarded by upgrading and upgrading and upgrading and get something better. And sometimes overindulgence gets the better of us and we can't take something too much. The beauty of happiness is nobody will complain if they are very happy. And there's no such concept as even too much happiness. The other point that's very important is, I want you to bear in mind as we move into this journey today, that happiness, according to the scriptures of Bhagavad Gita, and a very important scripture which I mentioned just now, known as the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is actually which is an extension in one sense of the Bhagavad Gita. Both these scriptures talk about a foundation for happiness. They state that if one wants to be happy, one needs a foundation for it. And that foundation actually comes when we are thoughtful and when we are contemplating on finding the meaning and purpose to our life. So these are some concepts of happiness that I'm throwing out to you at this moment. Most of the time, happiness begins with a question. What is my aim in life? Everybody asks that question at some point of time. Your aim could be an ambition. Your aim could be, something that you have never done and you want to do. Your aim could be to be the best worker, the best lawyer, the best doctor. So aims are very important because they have a direct connection to happiness. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the Bhagavatam, and basically actually in all the Vedic scriptures that we speak about, the aim of life is given very simply: to be happy, to be satisfied, and to be peaceful. And if you ask anyone, no matter what their immediate aim is, you'll find that their final aim is actually to be happy, satisfied, and peaceful. If you ask me, for example, when I was younger, what would be the aim of your life? And I would say, I want to become a lawyer. And if you ask me further, why do you want to become a lawyer? I'll give you all the reasons why I wanted to become a lawyer. But eventually, the actual reason why I want to become a lawyer and it's staring at me at my face, but sometimes we miss it, is because I think that pursuit of law will actually give me some form of happiness, satisfaction, or peace. And that's a very important point for us to keep in mind. Our lives today are very challenging. We have anxiety, we have stress. Um, as a lawyer, I am seeing so many issues in family law, contractual disputes, civil litigation has increased. They say in good times and bad times, lawyers, we tend to be quite happy in terms of work, but it's very challenging. And very often, most of us find that life is like a pressure cooker. How do we get out of it? And very often, while we solve one anxiety, we find another anxiety is around the corner. And there are days when we think, wait a minute, I've ticked off everything and I shouldn't be feeling anxious. But you have this residual anxiety that's lurking at the back. And you tend to wonder, what is that about? So, all in all, anxiety, challenges, frustration, um, tension, stress, and eventually even things like depression, they're all out there. That's why this topic is very relevant. The Bhagavad Gita has an advice for us to pursue the path of happiness. It tells us very interestingly to look at the nature of the world that we live in, the world, Earth. The Gita tells us from a worldview that actually the nature of this world, right, impacts our ideas of happiness. The Gita tells us in the 8th chapter, 15th verse, that this world has a nature. Sometimes people find it surprising. Can the world have a nature? But then we all have natures too. And you'll find very often each person's nature is a bit different from the other, isn't it? But the Gita says this entire material world we live in has a nature. And that nature is known in the Gita and the scriptures as Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam. What it means actually is this world, all the objects in this world, they have one quality. They're all temporary. And because they are temporary, when we attach ourselves to this temporariness, and we expect that this temporariness will last longer and become eventually permanent, we eventually become disappointed or we become miserable. You realize from the time you were young, we always wanted stability. But the only stable thing in this world is change. The only constant thing in this world is change. We want something to be permanent, but we don't realize that either time takes away that thing or circumstances take away that thing. And by nature, everything in this world is temporary. So that's a very important point to be mindful of. The Gita also goes deeper into this very searching question. Can you really be happy in this world? The happiness notion here being the usual idea of happiness. The Gita tells us that wherever we are, whoever we are, whatever we subscribe to, there will always be three different kinds of miseries or anxieties that will afflict us. And as I put them out, I want you to think about them seriously and see whether you have been affected by them at some point. The first misery, the Gita says, is misery caused by others. You walk down the street and you think everything's all right, and all of a sudden somebody comes and either knocks into you, harasses you, or like it has happened before, drives a PMD on on the pavement and hits you, and you wonder, I wasn't searching for trouble, I wasn't searching for anxiety and misery. Nobody searches for that, and yet every day we find that in our interactions with someone or something, misery and anxiety can be caused by others. You may be the best person in the world, you may not be harming anyone, but in this world there's no guarantee that that doesn't mean that misery will not come to you. Then the Gita says there are miseries caused by forces of nature. Just look around you. You see droughts, you see fires, you see every form of natural disasters happening every day. There is a more significant percentage of the newspaper dedicated to miseries caused by forces of nature than there is to any other group of news. And this is getting worse. But this is part of the nature of the miseries of the world. And then you have miseries that are caused by ourselves. And you may be thinking, why should we make ourselves miserable? But the Gita says we very often make ourselves anxious and miserable when we speculate, when we think when we think ill of others, when we judge a situation, when we look at someone and draw inferences and either become worked up, when we judge a situation and form negative opinions about it, when we speculate. So very often you find the decisions we make in our lives also can invariably cause us miseries. So you'll find that these threefold miseries the Gita speaks about doesn't subscribe to a particular faith. They don't. They subscribe to practical living. And very often we see that. But the Gita is not over yet. The Gita also says that the reason why many of these miseries and difficulties come in our lives is because inherently, the moment we adopt this body, we call it in Sanskrit as sharir, the moment you adopt the sharir and you're born into this world, you find that all living beings, particularly human beings, we are all susceptible to four very important defects. It is natural for us to commit mistakes. It happens. And yet we can be very harsh with those who commit mistakes and think that we are perfect. The second thing is, very often, because we don't have an idea of the big picture or even an accurate set of facts and information, we are invariably illusioned about something and we draw adverse inferences. The third is, generally speaking, if we have a chance to cheat someone of something or to further our objectives and advance our goals ahead of someone, then that tendency to push ourselves ahead of someone or even find means and ways which are not always nice is there. And Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita defines it as a natural tendency for us to try and cheat and find the easy way out. And the last challenge that we face is that we are limited by imperfect senses. If I off this light that's shining on me now, chances are you won't be able to see me. Chances are I will not be able to see the room in which I am. And yet we place so much emphasis and weight on what we think we can see and what we can hear and what we can perceive. The interaction of the four defects very often causes difficulties between our interactions. And because we're not forgiving and compassionate to understand other person's defects, we cause others anxiety and others also cause us anxiety. And it's very difficult to be happy when you have all this there. And of course, to complete the whole show of unhappiness, the Gita tells us that we have four stations of life. And these four stations of life are by themselves challenging. Being born into this world is a difficult process. Ask your mothers, and they will tell you it was not easy. Disease. There's no one in this world that cannot be free of disease. In this time of COVID-19, it becomes even more prominent. Some of us who will survive to a certain age will definitely reach the age of what we call old age. And if you ask your grandparents or your aged parents, they will tell you that there was a time when they had the energy to do so many things, but now that energy is fast dissipating. And very often, old age is a challenge. I remember my spiritual master telling me, he would tell me, Devki, when I was younger, walking up the staircase was so easy. Today, just taking one stair after one stair is like climbing the Himalayas. So it's not an easy proposition. And finally, who looks forward to death? And death itself is not an easy process. So these, when you put all of them together, the Gita has a lot of concepts to share, which show us that the nature of the world itself is a difficult place. It doesn't lend easily to happiness. But all is not lost, because Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita advises his dear friend and devotee on how we can achieve happiness and peace. It's a very nice verse in the Gita. Nastir buddhira yuktasya nacha yuktasya bhavana nacha bhavayata shantir ashantasya kuta sukham. Krishna tells Arjuna, Arjuna, if one is not connected with the Supreme, our Creator, then two things will elude us. We will not have the requisite transcendental intelligence and maturity to understand the world as it is, and our mind will not be steady. And without the requisite transcendental intelligence and a steady mind, it is very difficult to attain happiness, without which there is no possibility of peace. So this is a very important verse to keep in mind, and I'll bring it up again later. But the Gita tells us that connecting with who we are and where we have come from, will bring us two very important components towards happiness. And that's realization and transcendental knowledge and a steady mind. And as Krishna says here, if there's no possibility of peace, that's there. But how will you be happy if you are not even peaceful? See, that's a very important point. Sometimes we think which comes after what, but we don't realize that until we become peaceful and satisfied, happiness is very temporary. It will come, but it is as fleeting as a flying cloud across the sky. Very important point. So today, from the Gita, there are 6 components that make up this vaccine that we all must take to become happy. There's a booster too, but that we will talk about later. These are the 6 components that the Gita addresses. First, accept more and expect less. Second, the universe is your university. Third, the secret to satisfaction is the joy of service. Fourth, simplify, but don't complicate your existence. 5, take up the principle and embrace the principle of unity in diversity. And 6, pursue the meaning of life and not just the temporary pursuit of fleeting happiness. Let's unpack them today. The first point that the Gita brings up is to accept more and expect less. Why is this so important? As we said just now, when you have accepted the rules of a game, you can then play it. Think about it. If you sat down with someone to play chess, but the board is backgammon, you and your player and your opponent will never be able to play chess because you haven't accepted that this board was not meant for chess. So accepting the nature of the world is very important because it teaches us an important quality that is a prerequisite for happiness, and that is renunciation. The Gita tells us that everything is temporary. Nothing lasts, yet we expect it to. There's a beautiful story of the Buddha, and this lady who came to see him. One morning, this lady called Gautami came to see the Buddha. And unfortunately, her son had just passed on, and she carried the body of the dead child to come and see him. When she came, she fell at the feet of the Buddha, and she said, "Master, please give me relief from this terrible misery in my heart." And Buddha said, "What can I do, child?" And Gautami said, "Revive my child, and that will bring me happiness." And the Buddha said, "Reviving your child will not bring you happiness, neither will it bring your child happiness, because that happiness will be short-lived, and he will have to leave this world again." But Gautami was so grief-stricken, she could not hear him. So Buddha said, "All right, I will revive your child, provided you do one thing. Go to any house in this village and beg for mustard seeds. The only condition being that that house must not have known death ever. It must not have known disease. It must not have known any challenges of life." And Gautami thought, surely there must be someone with that. And with hope springing eternal in her heart, she went away. By evening, she came back looking wiser, looking more reflective, and surprisingly looking more peaceful. She lay the dead son at the feet of Buddha, and she said, "My dear Buddha, I today understand what is the real meaning of happiness. To become happy, we must accept that the nature of this world is temporary. And when I went to every house and begged for mustard seeds, I couldn't get mustard seeds, not because they didn't have them, because the condition that you requested me to forward to them, no one could meet. Everyone had death in their house. Everyone had difficulties in their house. But now I understand that. And therefore, in renouncing the expectation of permanence, I have become peaceful." So this is the point of acceptance. When we are anxious about losing what we possess, it becomes very difficult. That's why historically, there's a very famous story of Alexander the Great. Before he was going to die, and he died at a very young age, and it was a very innocuous disease that came from a mosquito bite, historically speaking. He left 3 wishes and 3 instructions for his courtiers. The first was that his body be carried by all the doctors who tried to save him. They become his pallbearers. Second, that his hands be put out of the coffin for the world to see. And third, for all the money that he had and wealth, especially the trinkets and small coins, to be thrown on the road. And the courtiers asked him, why such unusual requests? And he said, I want my pallbearers to be my doctors, to show the world that no matter how best a physician you may have, at the end of the day, when my time is up, I must accept it. The second reason I want to put my palms out for the world to see is because there's nothing I can hold when I die. Though in life I have tried to hold on to everything in the known world as the greatest conqueror that ever lived, I have to accept the fact that death ultimately will conquer me. And the third point he said was, throw all the coins out on the streets because they mean nothing to a man who is about to die. And he laughed and he said, but despite me giving all these lessons to humanity, I can guarantee you that when I leave in the coffin, there will be hundreds who will pick up the coins, thinking that these coins will actually give them happiness. So renunciation is a very important concept, and it helps us to accept things around us and become peaceful. When we lose that which we think belongs to us, it is very painful. But Bhagavatam has a very important verse to share with us. Yam yam artam upadate dukkhena sukha hetave tam tam dhunoti bhagavan puman sochati yat krite. Whatever that is produced by the materialists with great pain and labor for so-called happiness, the Supreme Personality, as the time factor, destroys. And for this reason, the conditioned soul laments. Think about it. With great difficulty, we work so hard for what comes to us. And sometimes we don't realize that we are not introspective enough to realize that whatever that we labor for, we cannot place so much of dependence on it, because by nature, by time, it also will leave us. So the wise man is one who accepts anything in introspection. He understands, or she understands, whatever I receive is helpful for a moment, but never should I put so much emphasis on the fact that it will be with me permanently. So this is a very important point, actually. There is a lesson in Srimad Bhagavatam. Huh? It's a nice story. You know, there were hawks that were flying around chasing for prey. And one of the smaller hawks happened to catch some meat, and it started flying up. And the moment it caught the meat, it knew that the larger and stronger hawks would start attacking it for the meat. And true enough, when they could not find any prey, they started attacking each other. But then they saw that the small hawk was holding on to some meat. So the hawks struggled, because the other hawks were actually fighting it, trying to let it go. But despite them trying to get the meat, the little hawk tried very hard to hold on to it, because it felt like just what the materialist felt. It felt that this is mine, I should hold on to it. But when it became so difficult, it realized that what is the point of holding on to something which in any event is going to leave? And at that point, the hawk ultimately gave up that meat. And the story goes that at that moment, it experienced relief, and it experienced a certain mode of renunciation and happiness. Everyone considers things in this world to be most dear to him. But because of that attachment, we eventually become miserable or anxious, because either we think that will leave us and we are always anxious and we can't enjoy it, or it leaves us because of the time factor. I work for a lot of clients who are very well-to-do and high net worth. And sometimes I ask them, you should be very happy with whatever you have. And they say, Siva, I wish, that I can sleep more peacefully, because the more I have, the more anxiety I have. So Bhagavatam tells us that when we understand this, that material possessiveness and attachment is not the way in life, then they can achieve unlimited happiness, satisfaction, and peace. Sometimes, like the hawk, we may have appeared to lose the battle, but ultimately the hawk gained the peace that the other hawks could not. So sometimes it's a trade-off. Do you lose the battle and win the war? Or do you actually lose the war but think that you have won the battle? That's an important point. Renunciation also comes when we experience a higher taste, isn't it? If I've been eating something sweet which is processed, yeah, I like it. But if you give me something which is natural and it tastes so much more richer, the higher taste for that will give me a chance to renounce a lower taste. And that is what the Bhagavad Gita tells us is happiness. Happiness means renunciation of temporary things by understanding their temporary nature. And in that way, when we achieve a happiness which is more permanent, we become more happy. So think about that concept. That's why Bhagavatam also tells us that we should cultivate what we call the platform consciousness. The platform consciousness is an interesting idea. If you've been to India, you know that sometimes we have to take a train to one city and then we have to wait for the next train. So what do? There's an interval, right? Sometimes there's a waiting room, or you sit on your bags, or you sit on the benches. You may wait 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. You meet someone else, you talk, you strike up a conversation. And for a while, it seems like you two have become the best of friends. But when your trains come, nobody sits on the platform. We know it's time to go. So Bhagavatam tells us, live life like you would on the platform. We may be now together, and that is because of arrangement of the Lord. But there will come a time when we have to take our own trains. There will come a time when we have to take our own journeys. Accepting it is the key to happiness and peace. If you expect anything else, you will be disappointed. Which then brings us to a very important point. Accepting the nature of people around us is so important. Bhagavatam tells us that different people are of different mentalities. So it's not our business to either praise them or blaspheme them. We should just desire their welfare. There will never be anyone here, even in the august group of all of us here, who will always agree on everything. But it is not my business to praise them or even to blaspheme them. What is more important is to serve them. If we accept that everyone has a different mentality, everyone has a reason for performing something, then we try to understand the reason. Even if it doesn't agree with us, we should appreciate that we are all different. So this is a very important point. And this is from the Bhagavatam, which now brings us to a very important component, which is known as the pathway to happiness. If you want to reach happiness, you need a pathway to it. And the Bhagavad Gita speaks about dharma, and it's a very important word. Dharma has so many different meanings to it, as you can see here. Sometimes people see it as duty, activity. It could be purpose. It could be nature. It could be quality. If someone asks right now, what is your dharma, Devkinandan Das? I would say my dharma right now is to actually present this topic to you. That's my dharma. It's my purpose. It's my activity. It's my duty. And it's a quality that I'm trying to imbibe. But there is a deeper meaning to dharma in the Gita. And it's explained very nicely. Water may be water, but water has a quality that defines it as water, liquidity. Fire has a quality that defines fire, heat. The nature of fire is to burn. If it doesn't burn, it's not fire. The nature of water is to flow. If it doesn't flow, it's ice. Therefore, where there is fire, there's heat and light. Where there's water, there is flow. In other words, there's no meaning to the word fire. There's no purpose to its existence until there is a nature to it. So the Bhagavad Gita tells us that dharma actually refers to that which is consistently existing with us, our natures. That is a very important concept of dharma. And therefore, in the Gita, dharma actually means that which sustains one's existence. Sustaining may not just be a job. Happiness sustains our existence, isn't it? You'll realize that the happiness quotient makes such a difference in our health. And it's been proven time and time and again. So the important thing that Krishna tells in the Gita is that while we all have superficial duties, superficial not in the sense that they're not important, but they are there and they differ amongst us. But we all have a foundational nature, and that cannot be separated. And that foundational nature is not found on this body, which is temporary. It is attached to the soul, which is always eternal. And what is that foundational nature? It is stated in Bhagavatam. The supreme occupation or dharma of all humanity is to actually render devotional service to the Lord. You can call God in so many different names through so many different faiths, but we all have one occupation. It's like a denominator. The moment we connect, remember the verse earlier? That connection on the platform of loving devotion and service, that will completely satisfy the self. And that satisfaction leads to happiness. And that devotional service must have two components. We should not love someone just because we want something from them. Even in this material world, If someone keeps calling you because he always wants to use you, after a while you say, forget it. But if someone calls you because he cares for you or because he wants to serve you, he's bothered about who you are, then there is no motivation in that transaction. It is actually a relationship. Such an unmotivated relationship is always uninterrupted. And that is the basis of happiness in this world. So please remember this point: accepting versus expecting. It's a very important point. The next point that's really important is this idea of the universe is your university. University means a place to study, and this universe is this entire world. The Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam tells us that even though life has its ups and downs, consider life as a journey. And there are so many destinations before we die. Each destination, each relationship, each point, each day is a destination. And in each day, we take a journey. If we cultivate the proper attitude in life, that becomes very important. The other thing that Bhagavatam tells us that's really nice is this concept of absolute. When you chant the names of the Lord, for example, in any faith, why are those names so powerful? Why do they bring so much peace to our hearts? It's because the name of the Lord and the Lord are non-different. In other words, the journey is as sweet as the destination. That is why when we take up a spiritual outlook to life, we don't wait anxiously to reach a particular place. We enjoy the journey itself. Like, even though I'm anxious to finish on time, I'm enjoying my journey right now. I hope you are, but I'm enjoying it because anything that's connected to the Supreme is never laborious. So, an attitude that you cultivate, learn everything that happens. A devotee, a lover of Gita, never sees something that happens in this world as an accident, but we try to see what we can learn from it. So it's either you wear the lenses of accident and or lamentation, or you wear the lenses of arrangement and understanding and lessons. And you all know, whether you subscribe to a faith or not, that positive energy attracts positive energy. There's a nice story in our scriptures. There was a minister and a king who were very close. Minister was very faithful and very much a devotee. And he always told the king, even in the face of calamity, see the hand of God. One day the king went into the forest with his retinue, which included the minister, and a lion came out of the jungle. And in the fight that ensued, the king survived, but he lost his thumb. Very painful. All the ministers were very, very upset with the situation. But this minister calmed the king down and said, there is some benefit to this too. Be positive. And the king was very upset because it was painful. And he sent the minister back. He said, I don't want to hear this. And he jailed him actually. The king went on into the forest and he was caught by a band of bandits. In India, you call them dacoits. And the bandits, wanted to sacrifice this king because they thought by sacrificing him, their looting and their bandit propensities would increase. So the priest was getting the king ready for the sacrifice when he realized that the king would not be eligible. Why? Because he was missing a thumb. And according to the book of sacrifices, the king had to be complete. So no choice. The king of bandits said, you are free to go. The king came back to the kingdom and released the minister and embraced him and told him, when I lost the thumb, I thought it was the end of the world. But the loss of the thumb led to a saving of my life. So this is a very important thing. Sometimes it's a question of how we look at life. But then he asked the minister a very important question. My dear minister, you say that it's about how we see life. It's about how we have an attitude to life. But how did it benefit you staying in jail like that? You were suffering. And the minister said, my dear king, you and I were inseparable. If we were really together everywhere, what would have happened is that the dacoits would have caught both of us. They would have tried to sacrifice you, but when they found you were incomplete without that thumb, they would have turned to me and I would have been the sacrifice. Sitting in the jail was not so bad. I still have my life. It's an interesting story, but it gives us the idea that if you see the universe as a university, you learn to take good from even a situation that appears hopeless. And one very important way to avoid unhappiness is to avoid the blame game. When we see that there is a lesson to be learned from something, we don't blame persons or situations. We look internally, we examine ourselves, and in this way, we cultivate the peace within. So that's the second point, the second dynamics for the pursuit of happiness. The next very important thing is this idea of the attitude of serving and giving. And this frames the third point that I'm going to come up with. In this world, you realize one thing: whether we like it or not, everyone is serving someone. We may think, no, I'm not serving anyone, but think about it. One friend serves another, mother serves the son, wife serves the husband, husband serves the wife. The politician convinces the public that he will render valuable service to society. Whether he does it or not, of course, it's a different thing. The shopkeeper serves the customer always and says, customer first, I'm giving you a discounted rate even though he's making money. The artisan serves the capitalist serves the family all work hard, they serve the economy. So if you look around you very carefully, actually service is the constant companion of the living being. We all serve, we all serve, which now brings us to the third very important component of this vaccine. The secret to satisfaction and therefore happiness is actually the joy of service. We all must accept that we have an innate propensity to serve. Haven't you felt very happy when someone else who is dear to you, you make them happy? That happiness you get is very different. Everyone feels it at some point. So the Bhagavad Gita tells us the only question is, are we serving our minds and senses? Or do our minds and senses serve us? That's an important question. Very often we don't realize that sometimes we are servant of our senses. And when we are servants of our senses, we are just running after our senses or what our senses want without understanding what we want. It's a very important point. You see this picture here? This is the picture of a famous philosopher, Diogenes. And there's a very famous story, you can look it up. Alexander the Great was crowned, and all the famous philosophers and everyone from Greece came to see him. But he heard a very famous and wise philosopher called Diogenes. He did not come to see Alexander. So Alexander was intrigued because everyone who came was highly rewarded and they went home happy. So Alexander came with his soldiers and he stood in front of Diogenes the way you see him standing there, you know. And when he stood in front of him, he said, Diogenes, I'm Alexander the Great. I'd like to know why you didn't come today to witness my coronation. Because if you had come, I would have given you so much to make you happy. Do you know what Diogenes said? He looked very grumpy and grouchy. He was elderly, he was old, and he was seated that way with a stick. He put up his hand at Alexander, looked at him in a very rebuking fashion, and told him, do you mind moving away because you are actually blocking the sun? So Alexander the Great could not believe his ears. He said, I'm asking you what would make you happy. I will give it to you. And Diogenes said, well, if you move a little bit and I can get the sun, that would be fine. And Alexander the Great just realized then that Diogenes was not a servant to his senses. He was not attracted to the lure of wealth and the promise of riches that Alexander wanted to give him. It's an important point. Higher satisfaction comes from serving others, that's true. And it leads to internal self-satisfaction. But the conscience of who we are and that we are not servants to our anger, our lust, our greed, that is infinitely more important. One who is free of serving his mind and senses can really become happy by serving others. This is the secret of satisfaction. And this is how the joy of service comes. I want to share with you a very interesting story from Bhagavatam. And the story gives a nice point of who to serve. There was a city of Videha, a very ancient city. And there was a lady of society, and her name was Pingala. For many years, Bhagavatam tells us she derived pleasure in trying to satisfy others. But as she got older, her beauty was fading. And so the people who wanted satisfaction from her when she was young, they didn't come anymore. Still, she was expecting that there must be some affirmation of who she is. And so for her, her senses told her to stand by the doorway and wait. And she kept saying, this one will surely come because he is attracted to me. Many came and went, but they just walked by. And as night progressed, Pingala's hopes waned, and she became increasingly distressed and anxious. And then eventually she became so morose and her face dried up. Finally, filled with anxiety and most disappointed, she actually turned that disappointment into disgust with her material situation. Why am I running after my mind and senses? Why are my senses running after others to fulfill me? And when she experienced that indifference and detachment, then happiness arose in her mind. There is a beautiful Sanskrit proverb, that says disappointment gives rise to the greatest satisfaction. Very deep point. But that's the case with Pingala. Pingala had dedicated her entire life to satisfying the desires of others. So she thought that was happiness. And she engaged her mind, body, and words in the service of her mind and senses for others. And she completely forgot that her real role, her real foundational nature, was devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And she forgot that in this world, without Krishna, over expectation from others always leads to disappointment, frustration, and misery. And so Pingala decided that she will not think like that anymore. And she sang a beautiful prayer, a prayer which is so powerful for the prayer of happiness. Shantam samippe ramanam rati pradam vitta pradam nityamimam vihaya akamadam dukkha bayadi shokha moha pradam tucchamaham bhajenya. This is what Pingala said. I'm such a fool. I gave up the service of that person who has always been in my heart, who's actually my well-wisher, the bestower of real love and happiness, the source of real prosperity. He's been in my heart all this time, but I have neglected him. Instead, I have just served insignificant men who could never fulfill my desires, but who only brought me unhappiness, fear, anxiety, lamentation, and illusion. And this was the realization of Pingala. So this is where the point of expectation that we talked about marries itself with the joy of serving the Supreme Lord and not our senses. The problem with our expectations is that they vanquish us before anyone else does. It's not anybody's fault, it's our expectations. And we don't realize that we always expect others to behave in a certain way. But we don't realize that we cannot control them. We can't even control our own blood pressure. What to speak of controlling others? We can't even control our mind. This material world is a difficult world to live in, and throwing expectations into it is going to be very difficult. So this is what the Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam tells us to do. Which now brings us to a very important point, that when we want to expect, we actually create an illusion. When our mind is uncontrolled, it disturbs us. And that's why Bhagavatam tells us that expectation is the younger cousin for greed, because we want more and more and more. And when it's not fulfilled, we are hurt because we have a certain esteem of ourselves. Pingala stopped her expectations, and then she became happy because she accepted. Which now brings us to item number 4. We should learn to simplify and don't complicate our existence. That doesn't mean we don't plan, but planning about the future is very different from speculating about the future, isn't it? There's a nice story, in Bengal about this wise man. He was a bit of a trickster, wit. His name was Gopal. One day he heard his neighbors, husband and wife, very old, fighting with each other. When he went in there, he was shocked. They were really at each other. He said, "What happened?" And the wife said, "My husband recently got some money from some land. And now he's saying he wants to buy cows. And I'm telling him, if you buy cows, then there's not enough money for other family members. And he's insisting we should buy cows. So I'm very upset with him." Then what Gopal did was, he told the neighbor, "But you haven't bought the cows yet. Why are you fighting? The cows are not even here." She said, "No, but we are planning." And he said, "You're fighting." "No, we are planning." So Gopal went out and came back with a stick and started beating his elderly neighbor. And the wife got shocked. "Stop doing that. Why are you doing that?" And Gopal said, "I'm beating him because the cows that he's going to buy, they are going to go into the fields and they're going to eat the grass that's meant for my cows. And therefore I'm beating him for doing that." And the wife said, "We don't have cows yet." And Gopal said, that's my point. So sometimes we don't simplify existence, we complicate it. And the reason is we don't control our desires. Bhagavad Gita says you cannot stop your desires. They're like raging horses, but they can be channeled and dovetailed. And that's why Bhagavad Gita gives us this beautiful science. When you contemplate on an object, you will invariably develop attachment for it. From that attachment, you will think it belongs to you, so you become lusty for it. When you cannot get it, you become angry. When it leaves you, you become disillusioned. And then you forget the whole purpose of your existence. It's very important. And when that happens, you lose all sense of intelligence and you fall back into this eternal cycle of birth and death. So when we talk about simplification, it's very important, the Gita says, to divide between what we want and what we need. Only each one of you can define that. But if you really look at your life, you'll find needs do not create complications, but wants very often can create complications. That's why we have a formula from the Gita. If you appreciate what you have, your hankering will depreciate. And when the hankering depreciates, your appreciation gains more value. How to appreciate what you have? Be grateful for what you have. And gratitude drives away greed. Very important. So our real wealth is how many lives we have touched. How many lives have we improved? How many people have we served? Which brings us to the final point, unity in diversity. All of these different components of the vaccine can work when we have this critical principle. The reason why there's so much unrest and disturbance in this world is because we condemn diversity when we should be celebrating it. We criticize when something is different instead of trying to accept it. And we don't realize, as the Gita says, that all rivers lead to one ocean. There is this curious tale of the blind men. 4 blind men came across a large object. And because they were blind, they all started feeling different parts of the object. One of them felt an object and said, "My dear brothers, this is a snake. It's winding itself around me." The second blind man said, "No, this is a sword. It's piercing my cheeks." The third blind man said, "You're both wrong. This is a wide canvas that I'm feeling." And the fourth blind man said, "You're all wrong because I'm holding a pillar." All 4 blind men actually bumped into one single object. They bumped into an elephant. One of them felt the trunk and thought it was a snake. One felt, the feet and thought it was a stump or a pillar. The other felt the canvas and thought it was leather, perhaps. It was just the body of the elephant. And the other, felt actually, in this illustration, it's about the tail, like a furry mouse. But in other illustrations, it's about the tusk, which is a sword. The point of this is, each of the blind men was correct in their perception and experience. You can't fault them there. But to say their experience was the only experience, that's the problem. And that is where we fall short of happiness. So what's our conclusion today then? There is a booster for this happiness vaccine that's very important. We need to understand that there is a subtle and important connection between happiness, satisfaction, and peace. Happiness is at that top high-end scale where you feel happy and you have a high. But you need the building blocks of satisfaction and peace for you to launch into happiness. Happiness that is attached to matter, which is temporary, that will only temporarily stop your misery, like paracetamol or Panadol stops your headache. It suppresses it, but it doesn't go. But happiness, which is attached to spirit and internally, that happiness comes from within. It's not dependent on external conditions. That's a very important concept. So 3 qualities are needed as a booster for all the qualities that we spoke about that make the vaccine: appreciation, gratitude, and humility. How do we achieve this state? We come back to the verse we started with, that until we are connected with who we are and where we have come from, the possibility of peace and happiness is very difficult. How do we achieve this state of connection? In the association of drunkards, you become a drunkard even if you drink mineral water. In the association of like-minded devotees who look to peace and happiness as as something internal, that association helps us. And that's why we're all together today. We are all collectively trying to pursue this state of happiness. Another very important way to do it is by mantra meditation. And that's what we're going to do in a few minutes. Mantra is a very important word. It speaks about a transcendental sound vibration, which actually gives the mind a place to relax and rest. That's why it's mantra. Man means mind, tra means resting place. By chanting the names of the Lord, in whatever faith you are, you'll find that there is a peace and satisfaction that cannot be explained, but can only be experienced. That's why Bhagavatam has a very nice point to say. For a person who has suitable shoes on his feet, there is no danger, even when they walk on pebbles and thorns. For such a person with suitable shoes, everything is auspicious, isn't it so? There may be pebbles and thorns, but we are peaceful. That is the beauty of happiness. So if we are self-satisfied, then distress may be around us, but we feel happiness everywhere. And that's a very beautiful point to think about. So I think we should end by remembering the last component of this vaccine. All this will be just a ritual if we don't reflect deeply on the goal of our life. The more we reflect deeply on this point, that we all have different dharmas, you all come from different fields of life, but the common point for all of us is to understand the goal of our life. When that goal is clear, the mind is not disturbed. When the mind is less disturbed, happiness becomes more prevalent. Thank you very much for your time. Over to you, Vishal.
Thank you so much, Vivekanand. I think we will open the floor for any questions now. Now, since we have a lot of people, we would prioritize the questions from those who are joining for the very first time. So if you have any questions, raise your hands and we'll unmute you. Okay, no questions so far.
No questions makes me happy, Vishal.
Okay.
That's my pursuit of happiness. It means only two things. One, you're thinking about it. And I'm wondering, Vishal, whether we should share this PowerPoint with them.
Yes, yes.
I think it'd be really nice if we shared it with you, because these are things that you have to think about, contemplate. And if you have any questions, then I would be more than happy, to engage with you through Vishal and the NUS Bhakti Yoga Club.
Okay, then we can go to Kirtan.
Vishwa, I think we have one question. That would be nice.
Hi.
Hi, Vishwa.
Hi. I'm a PhD student in NUS, Department of Computer Science. So I have a very specific question. So now we are living in a world with technology, kind of internet everywhere. It's actually has surrounded our lives, right? So I find that it's actually really difficult to meditate with so many connectivity. So you have any suggestion on how to improve that even in this time?
Very important question. I ask the same question when I think of my children because they're connected everywhere. I find, Vishwa, that actually the more connected we are, actually that becomes, we develop a residual anxiety. And you find that, that connectivity very often gets us into this mode where we have no time for ourselves. For us to become mindful of who we are and what we are doing becomes difficult. My suggestion practically, and what I do, is that I set myself time limits and I draw lines for this connectivity. While we are becoming connected to the whole world, to lose our own connectivity is a disaster. And I find that it's actually in our hands, Vishwa. We'll have to draw certain lines and people will begin to appreciate it when we stay firm on that line. How you do it is really up to you, but the desire and determination to do it is very important. And I think, I thank you for bringing this up because it's something that we all are challenged with. I hope that's helpful, Vishwa.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Vishwa. So then we can go to Kirtan.
Sure. Vishal Prabhu, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave from here because I'm going to go out to the hall, and I'll be connected through another device in 2 minutes, and we will do Kirtan. When you all are doing Kirtan with me, my request to you is to chant the holy names of the Lord. The holy names, the vaccine works only when you take it, not when you talk about it. Talking and talking and talking about the vaccine doesn't mean the vaccine is going to go in. We need to do it. But talking is helpful because in the company of saintly persons, we are ready to go and take that vaccine, hopefully, right? So thank you very much for your time. And I wish you all the best in your pursuit of happiness. Hare Krishna. So I'm leaving first, okay? You all stay on.
So meanwhile, just a quick announcement. Every week on Friday evenings, we have virtual Gita wisdom sessions where we discuss Gita verse by verse. So we take a verse, we read it, we try to discuss it. We have interactive activities which we conduct online. Earlier, we used to be at the Yusuf Ishaq House in NUS, but due to restrictions, we are not yet back. Hopefully, in a couple of months, we'll be back on the campus, and then we can all meet in person. So most of you have joined the group, but we'll be sharing the link to the group later and you can join the group. So now we'll have some Kirtan.
So Vishal Prabhu, can I start?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Jai Shri Shri Radha Shyam Sundar Ji ki. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Bol. Krishna, Holy Name. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Nitai Gaur Hari Bo, Hari Bo, Hari Bo, Nitai Gaur Hari Bo, Hari Bo. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama